In this video, we're going to talk about physical network topology selection criteria, and we need to be thinking about this whenever we're designing a network. And it doesn't matter if you are working from home and you're setting up a home network, or you are studying to take the CCNA and you want to set up a network, or you work for a small organization or a big organization and you need to set up a network. Regardless, you need to think about what your criteria is, what your constraints are, and what resources you have available to you. So when we are looking to build out a network, we have to plan and design accordingly. And this is what this is all about. This is just a quick introduction to get you to think about your different constraints and your different criteria that you have to utilize. So let's go ahead and let's talk about it. So what's the first major criteria? Well, the first major one is it's a really important one. It is our cost. What's the cost of the network going to be? How much is it going to cost us? How much money do we have to spend? And what's going to fit within our budgetary constraints and what's going to meet our requirements. So we always need to be thinking about the cost. We need to think about how much money we have, and we need to think about how we can get the best bang for our dollar, where we're going to get a positive return on our investment. Now, the second thing we need to consider is the ease of installation. And this, along with the ease of maintenance, I'm going to talk about them together. It all comes down to your level of expertise and the level of expertise of the IT and networking people that you're going to be working with. So you need to design a network that your personnel can effectively not only install, but they can maintain. The last thing you want to do is purchase equipment and hardware where your personnel can't set it up and you can't afford to have somebody set it up. And then even if you do get it set up, they can't maintain it because they don't have the knowledge. And the last thing we need to consider is fault tolerance. And so, if we're looking at a mesh versus a star versus a point-to-point, we need to consider what's our fault tolerance requirements. How much availability do we need to our systems and our network and our servers? And if the server goes down, how long can we be okay without having that server online? Do we need to have 100% availability? Or if we have outages, are we going to be fine if it takes us an hour or 30 minutes to get it back online? So you need to think about all these different things. And on the next slide, I really just came up with some very generalized questions that you can think of. And when we're thinking about this, the first step is to really evaluate your underlying requirements, like I talked about on the previous slide. And so these questions here are going to help guide you through that process. So for example, how many client computers will there be attached to the network? Because that's really going to determine the size of the network and how many switches and hubs you're going to need and what type of layout you're going to have. Again, how many servers are going to be attached to the network? That's going to have a huge impact, again, on how much cabling you need and how many different network devices you need to connect everything together. Another good question that we need to be thinking about is, what are the company's plans for future expansion? Is the company done expanding for quite some time? Did they just build out a new building and we are prepped for expansion? Or do we expect the company to continue to expand over the next coming years? Because if we do expect the company to expand, we need to build that into our network design. So maybe we buy bigger switches that have open ports that are available for expansion. Versus if we know that the company is already done expanding in this building and they can't expand anymore, maybe we just buy the switches that are the most cost effective and they're going to get the work done that we need. The next thing to consider is what type of applications are going to be running on your network. So that gets down to the speed, and we haven't talked about the different cablings and the different speed aspects of that, but that's something we need to consider. Are we just going to be sending Word documents and PowerPoint files and Excel spreadsheets across the network, or are we going to be streaming media across our network? Are we a multimedia company, or are we somebody such as like YouTube out there, or somebody that's going to have huge bandwidth requirements? Because in regards to the design and the equipment that we use, specifically the cabling, it's going to have a huge impact on that. The next question is, are we going to need a peer-to-peer or should we do a client-server? Again, we talked about what's involved in that, and there's pros and cons to setting up a peer-to-peer network versus a client-server, and we need to choose which one's best for us in our scenario. The next one is, how much fault tolerance do we need to have in place? And we talked about that a bit earlier. So we need to determine how much availability and uptime we need, and if we're okay with downtime, and if we're not, then how much fault tolerance do we need to build into our network to make sure it's up per the availability needs that we need. And then the second to last question gets back to our budgetary constraints. So how much money do we have available? what's our budget? And what can we afford to build out? Because we can spec out a design, but if we can't afford it, then what's the point? And then lastly, what are the security considerations? So there's security devices that we can put on our network. We can have firewalls, we can have internet intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems, and spam filters, and all sorts of different things. But do we need them? And if we need them, how much are they going to cost? So, these are just some of the general questions, and before you start designing and building out your network, you need to just go ahead and think about questions like these and start filling it out to give you a better idea of your requirements and your scope of your design. So that's my quick little introduction to thinking about your topology selection in terms of your requirements, your criteria, your constraints, and really using that to drive how you're going to design it.